April 8, 1943. 27,000 feet above Lille, France. The sky was burning. Trails of white vapor carved through the blue like scars, and black puffs of flak burst around a formation of silver bombers, the mighty Boeing B-17 flying fortresses, on their way back from a mission deep inside occupied Europe. The air vibrated with the heavy rumble of 4 Wright Cyclone engines, each one thundering at full throttle, fighting to keep altitude as the aircraft limped home toward England. One of those bombers, Miss Charlotte, from the 96th Bomb Group, had taken a beating. Its number 3 engine was dead, and holes the size of fists riddled her fuselage. Smoke drifted from her tail, and one of the waist gunners lay slumped beside his .50 caliber Browning, his oxygen mask frosted with blood. The pilot, Lieutenant Robert "Bobby" Collins, wrestled the controls, his co-pilot yelling over the intercom. "We've lost hydraulic pressure. Engine 2's overheating." The fortress shuddered violently. The Luftwaffe wasn't far behind. 2 Messerschmitt Bf 109 streaked in from the clouds, cannon shells flashing past the bomber's nose. The remaining gunners sprang to life. Twin Brownings roared from the top turret, the tail gun spat fire, and the sky filled with the chatter of .50 caliber rounds. One of the Bf 109s broke off trailing smoke, but the other stayed glued to the tail, closing fast. Inside the cramped tail compartment, Sergeant Harold "Red" Morrison gritted his teeth and squeezed the triggers. Tracers zipped past the German fighter, and then, impact. The 109 peeled away, its right wing snapping off before it spiraled into the clouds below. The adrenaline rush faded into silence. The fortress was alone now, limping over enemy territory with only 3 working engines and a half-conscious crew. Collins knew they'd never make it across the channel. He grabbed the radio. "This is Miss Charlotte, we're going down." They spotted a stretch of open farmland below, flat, wide, and just long enough for a belly landing. The crew braced for impact. The bomber hit the earth hard, skidding across the muddy field before coming to rest near a line of trees, one wing sheared clean off. Smoke curled from the wreck, but by some miracle, it didn't catch fire. Within minutes, German soldiers from a nearby garrison surrounded the wreck. The Americans were dragged from the fuselage, injured, dazed, but alive. And behind them stood their prize, a nearly intact B-17F, the first the Germans had ever captured in such condition. Word traveled fast. Within days, Luftwaffe intelligence officers arrived to inspect the bomber. They had studied Allied aircraft before, but never one like this, complete, functional, and bristling with guns. One officer, Major Hans Werner Lurk, an experienced test pilot known for flying captured enemy planes, circled the fortress with an almost childlike fascination. "So, this is the flying fortress," he murmured. "Let's see what makes it so formidable." The Germans quickly towed the aircraft to a nearby airfield. Mechanics began patching the fuselage, replacing damaged components, and repainting the tail with a black cross and yellow band, the Luftwaffe's mark for captured Allied planes. But they didn't just want to look at it. They wanted to fly it. And soon, they would. April 16, 1943. Recklinlars Air Base, Germany. The morning fog hung low over the runway, rolling like smoke between hangars. Inside one of them stood an unmistakable shape, a foreign silhouette amid the gray-painted fleet of Messerschmitts and Focke-Wulfs. The captured B-17F, Miss Charlotte, gleamed under the dim lights, her once proud American stars now replaced by black Bokenkreuz markings. Major Hans Werner Lurk, clipboard in hand, walked slowly beneath the bomber's massive belly. He had flown nearly every Allied aircraft the Luftwaffe managed to capture, Spitfires, P-38s, P-51s, but nothing as massive as this. Around him, a team of German ground crew and engineers murmured, inspecting the strange foreign machine. "Incredible," one of them muttered. "It's like a flying gun battery." The fortress looked every bit the monster its reputation claimed it to be. 11.50 caliber Browning M2 machine guns jutted from turrets and windows across the airframe, 2 in the nose, 2 on top, 2 in the waist, 2 in the tail, 2 in the ball turret, and 1 in the cheek mount. The Germans counted, and counted again. Every direction was covered. Lurk climbed the ladder into the cockpit, brushing past the metal frame that still smelled faintly of oil and smoke. Inside, he found rows of labeled dials, heavy control yokes, and thick bulletproof glass. Everything felt robust, industrial. Even the control cables were twice as thick as those found in German bombers. "It's built like a tank," he remarked. No wonder they call it the Flying Fortress. The engineers prepared the aircraft for its first test flight. Fuel tanks were topped off, instruments recalibrated, and the engines checked. A small swastika flag fluttered near the hangar door as a crowd of officers gathered to witness the spectacle. When the moment came, Lurk strapped in beside his co-pilot, Oberleutnant Dietrich Schwab, a veteran bomber pilot from the Eastern Front. Both men exchanged a grin that mixed curiosity with apprehension. Ready, Dietrich? As I'll ever be. Let's see if the Americans know how to build an airplane. The engines coughed, sputtered, then roared to life, one after another, the deep, throaty rumble of the four-right Cyclone R-1820s echoing across the airfield. Mechanics covered their ears as the propellers blurred into silver discs. The ground trembled. The B-17 rolled forward, heavy and deliberate, gathering speed. The long wings flexed as the bomber lifted from the runway, its wheels tucking away into the belly with a satisfying click. The German officers below craned their necks to watch as the American giant rose into the sky, wearing German colors. At 12,000 feet, Lurk leveled the plane and adjusted the throttles. He studied the instrument panel, marveling at the stability. She handles like a dream, he said over the intercom. Sluggish, yes, but steady. Even at this weight. They tested the bomber's climb rate, dive response, and turning radius. The Fortress wasn't agile, it never claimed to be, but it was unshakably stable, even under turbulence. The Germans were impressed. The control system, autopilot, and oxygen setup were years ahead of anything they had seen in their own bombers. After an hour, they descended and touched down smoothly, engines humming in perfect sync. As the props wound down, Lurk turned to his co-pilot, eyes wide with genuine admiration. Now I understand how these things survive so long over our territory, he said. It's not just the guns, it's the engineering. The Americans built this to come home, no matter what you throw at it. The officers who gathered around the aircraft afterward peppered the pilots with questions. How did it handle? Was it slow? Could it outclimb a Heinkel? Lurk answered calmly. It doesn't need to run. It fights back. Over the next several days, the Luftwaffe continued to test the captured B-17. They flew mock interception drills, pitting the Fortress against squadrons of Bf-109s and Fw-190s to analyze how best to attack Allied formations. The German pilots took turns flying alongside the bomber and then simulating attacks. But what they learned surprised, and frightened, them. Even when flown by friendly hands, the Fortress's overlapping fields of fire made it almost impossible to approach without being shredded. The nose and tail guns created deadly kill zones that covered nearly every angle of attack. The midsection gunners could pivot to cover blind spots, and the ball turret, spinning freely beneath the fuselage, could strike from below where no other bomber could defend. Lurk shook his head after one such trial, watching tracer rounds from the German fighters streak harmlessly past. You see, even if only half the gunners are alive, you still can't get close without taking damage, he told his superiors. This machine was built for survival. By the end of the week, Luftwaffe intelligence had its full report. The B-17 was slow, yes, but it was deadly. Its heavy guns, armor, and rugged design gave it unmatched endurance. German pilots began to understand why their own fighters often returned from raids filled with holes, and why the American bombers, despite horrendous losses, always seemed to make it back across the channel. The Flying Fortress wasn't invincible, but it earned its name, and even the men who fought against it couldn't deny their respect for it. May 1943. Luftwaffe Research Command, Berlin Gatow Airfield. The conference room smelled faintly of oil, cigarette smoke, and cold coffee. Charts of B-17 formations and attack vectors were pinned to the walls. Around the table sat some of the Luftwaffe's most experienced fighter leaders, men like Oberst Hajo Hermann, pioneer of night fighter tactics, and Major Gunther Rall, one of Germany's top aces. At the head of the room stood Major Hans Werner Lurk, flanked by engineers from the Luftwaffe's test division. On the table lay a thick dossier stamped Geheime Kommandosake, top secret. Inside, detailed schematics, ballistic analysis, and flight notes on the captured B-17. Lurk cleared his throat. Gentlemen, the American bomber is unlike anything we have faced before. He gestured to a large diagram of the Flying Fortress, each gun position marked with arcs of overlapping fire. Every approach angle, front, rear, above, below, has a defense. The nose alone carries 5 machine guns. Even the underbelly is guarded by this rotating sphere, the Sperry ball turret. Hermann leaned forward, frowning. "You're saying there's no safe attack vector?" "Not one," Lurk replied. "We flew it ourselves, simulated real engagements. The tail gunners can track you from over 800 meters. The top turret overlaps with the rear, and the waist gunners can pivot nearly 180 degrees. Even our fastest fighters, 190s at full throttle, can't stay long enough in firing range without taking return fire." The room went silent except for the soft ticking of a clock. Then, slowly, the pilots began to speak. "We've seen their formations over Bremen," one officer said. "Dozens of fortresses flying tight, covering each other. You can shoot one down, but the others tear you apart." Another added grimly, "We used to mock them for sending bombers without escorts. Now I understand why so many of us never came back." Lurk opened a black and white photograph, showing the B-17 cockpit riddled with shrapnel holes. Despite the damage, the instruments and armor plates had remained intact. "This," he said, tapping the photo, was after simulating a direct hit from a 20mm cannon shell. The armor around the pilot's seat held. The controls, still operational. Gasps and murmurs filled the room. Even hardened veterans exchanged uneasy glances. "So," Herman asked quietly, "what do you recommend?" Lurk sighed. "If we are to bring these down efficiently, we must change our tactics. Head-on attacks, coordinated volleys, heavy cannon bursts. No more tail chasing. It's suicide." That evening, outside the test hangar, Lurk stood beside the captured B-17, its massive frame glinting under floodlights, Luftwaffe crosses still painted across her wings. He placed a gloved hand on the cold aluminum skin, feeling the weight of his discovery. He wasn't alone. A group of young Luftwaffe pilots approached, curious to see the American legend up close. One of them, Lieutenant Carl Wiese, stared at the bomber's gun ports and shook his head in disbelief. "We thought it was propaganda," he said. "All those stories about fortresses firing in every direction." "But it's true, isn't it?" Lurk nodded slowly. "I've flown many aircraft, Carl. None are built like this. The Americans didn't design a bomber, they designed a fortress that happens to fly." He looked up at the cockpit windows, imagining the men who once sat there, young Americans, barely older than the German pilot standing before him. Men who had faced the flak and fighters of Europe, trusting their aircraft to bring them home. "You know," he said softly, "when I fired the guns myself, I felt something strange. For the first time, I understood why so many of our aces fall to these machines. You're not fighting just the crew, you're fighting the aircraft itself." The younger pilots listened silently. The respect in Lurk's voice was unmistakable. In the months that followed, Luftwaffe Command used the captured B-17 to train its fighter units. They ran attack simulations, filmed gun runs, and analyzed every weakness they could find. Reports were distributed across German air commands under the codename Dornier D-222, a cover designation to hide the American origin. But no amount of training could change one simple truth: the B-17 was an aircraft designed to take punishment and still deliver its payload. Even as the Luftwaffe refined their tactics, B-17 formations continued to hammer German industry from above. Their losses were heavy, but the effect on morale, and on the war's industrial heart, was undeniable.